There's a lot of obscure video games and classic games which are incredibly good, which were forgotten about, or they were never discovered because you guys grew up way too late in order to enjoy the arcades like I did when I was just a child and through high school and even in college and even now my Xbox behind me playing Call of Duty 7, which I love, all you Battlefield haters, but I digress. So there's a few video games out there that come to mind immediately, like for example, Trojan, Castlevania, the arcade version, RoboCop, there was a wrestling game, I forgot what it was called. Well, I was first thinking of the WWF one, but the one that I remember was called Tag Team, and it was based on fake wrestlers, but it was amazing control. I think I'm going to do a video on that one now because it just came to my mind. But there is one game that stands out to me that was incredibly popular during the time. No, I'm not talking about Ghosts and Goblins or its sequel, Ghouls and Ghosts, or Ninja Gaiden, because those were all popular and they were legitimately popular, and a lot of people knew about them. Even Ikari Warriors 1, 2, and 3, even though 3, you know what? I actually like 3 better than 2, believe it or not, but the first one was pretty good. Just like Commando. All right, I'm going off on too many tangents. I'm talking about a game today that many of you have never heard of, but you should check it out, even if it's just as an emulator. But you should see it live at Galloping Ghost Arcade in Brookfield, Illinois. Tell Doc Mac that Jeff the Producer sent you. He will give you a 0% discount. The name of the game is Rolling Thunder, one of the most obscure and fun side-scrolling games you will ever play. It was based on this really skinny dude, kind of like James Bond, but he's very weird, but he moves cool. It's this dual layer thing. You got to see it to believe it. And he's fighting all these masked guys who aren't really ninjas, but they kind of look like ninjas. And they're like doing kind of a weird Sig Heil Hitler type of thing. I guess Hail Hydra. And it was just a very bizarre game. It only had 4 stages, but the playability was so much fun. You had a gun as a weapon and you can, like I said, change levels up and down. Hard to describe, very fun to play. And that's what is the foundation of most of these games, why they were so good, because the playability and the control. But anyway, so the game is Rolling Thunder. It was put out by Namco. It was released in 1986. It had a nice, smooth side-scrolling, what's called a run and gun template, which it wasn't really a template. So I don't know why I'm calling it a template, probably because my brain is a little screwed up, but it definitely had a spy feel to it. And it was completely unique. You can go through these doors and corridors, but it established a legacy that resonates even today. For anyone who, like I said, didn't enjoy it, you need to go and try it out. So Rolling Thunder was developed and published by the Japanese gaming powerhouse Namco. They were already known for defining arcade classics like, of course, Pac-Man and Galaga. It was first released in December of 1986, and it was part of an effort to diversify its catalog beyond maze and space shooters into the action genre. And it wasn't released in the United States until February of 1987, just a couple of months later, and it was distributed by Atari. So obviously Atari was trying to make a small comeback too in the arcades. And I think around that time, didn't they have 720 and some other cool games? Anyway, I digress. So the game ran on Namco's System 86 arcade hardware. And a key creative figure in the game's development was Junko Ozawa, who was credited as the composer. Unbelievably cool music in the background. As far back as I can remember, I still remember that. It definitely gave you the game's identity, perfectly captured that kind of spy espionage mood, you know what I mean? Very, very cool. Definitely 007-esque, but with a Japanese tinge to it. Very, very fun to play. Now, it's kind of hard to find a list of the designers and programmers because they're not really documented, which is sad because I wanted to give them some credit. But the overall design team at Namco was responsible for creating Rolling Thunder. Too bad we can't get any specific names. The motivation behind Rolling Thunder was very clear: to leverage the popular appeal of that 1960s era spy and action films, of course, like James Bond, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and translate it into a strange, stylish, atmospheric gameplay that also felt a little bit like it was a Japanese animation from the 80s. There was a lot of cool stuff you could watch if you grew up in America on obscure UHF channels if you dug deep enough. A lot of people used to watch Voltron. I love Voltron. I loved all 3 versions. Yes, there were 3 versions, not just the lions, not just the cars, but also the 3 robots. I think the colors were red, blue, and yellow, if I remember. I actually had Voltron 3. They called it Voltron 3. I think the first Voltron was the cars, and I think the second one was the lions. I could be wrong about that, but just going from memory. So the story of Rolling Thunder basically puts you immediately into a strange covert mission. You take on one, the guy's name is Albatross, okay? Kind of like hanging an albatross around your neck, or if you watch The Sopranos, hanging a fucking albacore around my neck. And he worked for the World Crime Police Organization, WCPO, like WNBC. The initial plot revolves around Albatross's vital mission to rescue his female partner, the equally skilled agent Lila Blitz, who has been captured by the nefarious shadowy organization known as Jeldra, not to be confused with Hydra or Zelda. Maybe it was The Legend of Zelda who captured Rolling Thunder's non-girlfriend female spy compadre. Who knows? But Jeldra is led by the mysterious figure Mabu, not Nabu, not Naboo. You're not gonna go get some sushi from this guy, but his name was Mabu, like Mr. Magoo, but instead you put an A, an M there. So Mabu, a menacing masked mastermind who, actually, I think they unmasked him, right? And he kind of looks like a weird demonic green face figure. Anyway, Albatross must infiltrate Jeldra's hidden base, a complex of futuristic and industrial environments across 5 stages. I thought it was only 4, each divided into 4 areas. Now that's very confusing. So I guess I see. That's why I thought it was 4, because it's 5 stages, but they were subdivided into 4, kind of like Mario Brothers, right? 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1. I don't remember if they even had that, because I'm not looking at pictures. Again, memory. The narrative is established with minimal text, letting the action and the setting do the heavy lifting, which it should do. Not like these modern video games where you got to sit there and read fucking dialogue for 10 minutes. I want to play the game. So that's what made arcades fun. And by the way, you can hit a button and skip past all this shit, not hold the A button and then wait for it to load. No, you hit the button, it's gone, And that's the whole point. You played a video game. I mean, imagine needing to sit through waiting for someone to tell you what the fuck to do when you're trying to play Street Fighter 2. That would have killed the game. Anyway, I digress once again. So the graphics and the atmosphere, unbelievable visual presentation. That was part of what made it fun. I mean, it felt almost like a cartoon, but not in the vein of Dragon's Lair, just in the fluid animation. So, and also it was very stylized. Like it had a weird aesthetic to it. Some would say 1960s. I don't. I think it had like a 90s feel to it, even though we're still in the 80s. It felt a little modern. It felt like it was belonging to a time period that was just ahead of itself. It still utilizes sprites, which is why it was so easy to play, because sprites are not those 3D polygonal, multifaceted bullshit thingies that you can't control with the slight millisecond delay, which is very tangible when you play any kind of game today. But instead, using sprites, which is the way it should be. So he was, the main character you're controlling, very tall and skinny, but incredibly well animated. The attention to detail with all of his movements, even the way that he grabbed the gun and shot it, like the gun had a little bit of kickback, and like it felt like you were watching a movie. Also, it was very cool. Very, very cool. The background art is very detailed, amazing atmosphere. It looked like first it was like an abandoned mansion, and then like an entrance to an underground kind of, I don't know, catacomb or something. And then you had these like futuristic looking bunkers. So it was diversified. It was fun. The enemies basically wore these hoods, and they were called the Moboloids or the Mabaloids. It's a little bit racist, right? Mongoloid, anyway. No, Devo, the evolution. There you go. Jocko Homer. Anyway, I digress. Also contributing to the unique visual style, they look like ninjas, but ninjas that didn't have the closed mask, kind of like an open mask, but they look very cool, and I love the colors. I remember them really standing out with the bright blue and the yellow, which is always a cool color combination. It reminds me of an old baseball team in Brooklyn called Youth Service, but I digress again. And of course, the weapon of choice from these non-ninjas who are hooded with their yellow, blue, and red hoods are pistols, and little type pistol guns. They're just kind of shooting at you. I think occasionally every now and then someone will come out with like a fucking grenade launcher or some shit, but it was cool. But as you progress through the game, you started to get these really bizarre kind of mutant looking guys that I guess are looking closer to the main guy who's also hooded, which is why I guess they're wearing hoods at the beginning. And you get these things that kind of jump out at you. And but the really cool thing about it is that it was almost like playing against those beasts from like Altered Beast, but the animation was very smooth. So they look like panthers, and then you had people that were basically lit on fire. So it was very weird, and again, very James Bond-esque in terms of the enemies, right? So it gave you that kind of feeling of variety and sense of challenge, which is unparalleled for games like this. And like I said, it was just a side-scrolling game, and but the way that it felt, the mechanics, very innovative, highly influential, and it did change the way that other games were made, because it demanded now, the players started to demand that, hey man, we want all of our games to be like this. It was very precise. it like required you to reload the gun. It was very, very cool. So there's a couple of interesting things to mention about Rolling Thunder's core mechanics. There was something called dual level platforming, where basically the levels are designed with two distinct vertical planes, a ground level and an upper platform. Like I was saying earlier, you have to jump up and down between them, and it looks fluid and it feels natural. It doesn't feel odd, but it's something new that was introduced to gaming that you didn't get before. And it also gave you like this 3D feel, because you would jump up on these rails, so you felt like that you were behind something, even though clearly it was just a 2D scroller. So it was very, very fun. A lot of covers and doors, meaning that you can get behind boxes and you can go into these doorways. And this was one of the most standout features of Rolling Thunder. So let's say that you're controlling the main character. I hate his name, but I'm going to say it, Albatross. He can actually go into the room and he can use it to actually reload his weapon. So there was an arm sign on some of the doors, but on all of the doors, you could just go in there and stay there if you held the joystick up, and then you look, you see all the enemies, they all look confused. They're going back and forth. So that was like pretty cool. Very heavy on the ammunition management, because unlike a lot of the other games of the time, if you think of Russian Attack, where you have this unlimited ammunition except for the special weapons like the grenades, it didn't require you to reload anything. So, but this guy, you had to reload him. So that's why you had the little display at the bottom of the screen saying, hey man, you're running out of ammo. And what ends up happening is that he gets this one slow bullet and he gets a weak punch. It's very, very weird, but it's also very cool, and it makes it a lot more fun because it keeps you aware of the fact, hey, I got to keep reloading this gun. A feature that was added to games like RoboCop and others that I can't think of right now, but I do remember that being the first game that utilized that in that kind of way. So they implemented something called a one-hit policy. If you get shot by like a single bullet, or even if they touched you, you were dead. It wasn't so demanding that it was impossible to learn. For example, the Castlevania arcade game was almost impossible to play because the play mechanics were just atrocious. It looked cool, and it had kind of fun music, and the main character was tall and he looked awesome and he moved cool, but you just got killed immediately. Can't think of other games. There were other games that were also like that, where it was very hard to control, but it was kind of fun to play. And no, I'm not thinking of Pit Fighter. That was just a shit game all around. Even though I did like to play it, I gotta admit, it's not as bad as everyone says, but it's definitely not a great game if you compare it to other games that are one of my fighting games. But I digress. The combination of these weird mechanics, the dual level movement, the limited ammo, it basically forced you to approach the game from a level of skill. So the more you played it, the better you got, and you'd eventually finish the game. But it took a while to do it, but it was fun to do it because you got the incentive of getting to the next level. When you look at games like Contra or Commando, it's just like, okay, you're just going to keep going forward until you get to the end, and that's like the end of it. Even Ghouls and Ghosts and Goblins or whatever, or Gunsmoke, it's like once you get to the end of the game and the end of the level, that's it, and nothing really changes. This one, it gets progressively harder, it gets more fun, it gives you more incentive to do more, and like I said, with the whole reloading the gun and getting hit once, you got to play good, and it rewards you for playing better. So it was a complete commercial success in the arcades in Japan and Europe, but not so much in the United States, because I would go to arcades and I would see it there and no one's touching it, and I would go up to be like, man, I'm pumping all my quarters in it, and every now and then, that's right, a few Asian kids, because I guess they were from Japan, or who knows, maybe Korea or China, and they just really liked the game because they appreciated the good stuff. I guess that's why everyone had this perception of Asian kids being smarter, because they always gravitated towards the smart shit. Well, guess what? I'm going to say that that's a true thing about the Asians that I grew up with, and even Asians I don't talk to anymore, who are many of my friends. I hope they're all doing well, Ed, but I digress. It was definitely popular when it came out in February of 87. One of the most highest grossing games of all time for 1987. Even people who critiqued the game liked it, even though it was highly challenging, because it was cool, it looked fun, it was a brand new concept, and especially with this jumping up and down, but also the guns and the animation and the way the enemies looked, it was just a very, very fun game. So there was a lot of attempts to bring it to the home ports, like computers and console systems at the time. The ZX Spectrum released it in December, Amstrad in 88, the Commodore 64 also in 88, Amiga and Atari ST, all of them in 1988. And the Commodore 64 version, as usual, it kind of looked cool, but it was way too fast, and it looked nothing like the arcade game, but it looked cool for what it was, which was a different type of translation. The Amiga one was fun. It was overly pixelated. The Atari ST one, again, shit. Even though you got people out there who are Atari ST purists thinking that it's better than the Amiga, false. But these 8-bit and 16-bit computer ports struggled to replicate the smooth animation, the detailed graphics, and the precision of the controls. The C64 one, again, a lot of people said that, it had bad graphics and had bad music, which was completely false, because I remember it having great music. And it said it was slow and unresponsive gameplay. That's not my memory. It was fast, but it was just not. There was no parallel to the video game. It was like its own game, and it was kind of fun, but it just wasn't Rolling Thunder. It was something else, So for the Nintendo Entertainment System, not the SNES, but the original one, they released it in Japan in March. So just a month after it was released in the United States, they released it on the Famicom, the Japanese Nintendo Entertainment System, not the Super Famicom, but the original one. So they brought it to Nintendo in the United States in October, and it was a different company because it was called Tengen, and it wasn't licensed from Nintendo, and I didn't like it. I thought it sucked. And it had a password system that allowed you to save it. It's like, no. The whole point is that you got to get better and play the game a million times. And I think that that's what killed its sales. I don't know if you guys remember the Atari Lynx, the handheld, Atari. It was all right, but nothing really notable to say about it. It was fun, but the damn screen was too small. And then later they re-released it on the Namco Museum system and, of course, series and the virtual consoles and the arcade archives and all that stuff. It's very weird, but this game didn't merchandise very well because there's no real merchandising that was released for it in 86 or 87. It was very weird because every now and then the characters would make these weird cameo appearances like Pac-Man 99 and, being like a special DLC character. So that was weird. I think that there was a sequel that came out in the 90s called Rolling Thunder 2. It looked okay, and I think you got to play the female character, but I hated it. I remember playing it on the Sega Genesis. I thought it sucked, and I think there was a Rolling Thunder 3, but again, it wasn't great. It was very different. And people argue me on this, but I think that the Rolling Thunder 2 and 3, I don't know, the characters just look slightly smaller and it was very repetitive. There was no reason to come out with the sequels if you're just going to do the same thing over and over again. It's like a lot of these times when you're playing these games, you see a sequel, it's usually completely different. Like if you look at Donkey Kong 1, 2, and 3, those are 3 different games, and the third one being the absolute fucking weirdest, which I don't even think that was supposed to be a Donkey Kong game, where you got a guy blowing, what looks like smoke up the ass of Donkey Kong in order to get him out of this bee thing. Yes, I know he's being like an insect guy and trying to exterminate these bees, but it was very bizarre. Donkey Kong 3 is one of the weirdest games. Maybe I'll do a video on that one too. But so there you have it. That is Rolling Thunder, released in 1986 in Japan, later in 87 in the United States. It was ported in late 87 and subsequently throughout the years from 1988 right up until 2022, where they re-released it. It was something called Hamster Arcade's Archives for the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4. Where the hell is my Xbox Series X port, guys? I want to play Rolling Thunder, the original version. By the way, why isn't there more of a demand for people to play these arcade games? I'll tell you why. Because there's a lack of attention being brought to games like Rolling Thunder. And Rolling Thunder was a fantastic game. I think if people played it today, it will be a nice change from all the horseshit that you guys have been getting. Just with the repetitive gameplay, the repetitive mechanics, and there's no innovation going on. Well, sometimes you got to look backwards to see the future. You know what I mean? And as paradoxical as that sounds, it really isn't, because it is another way of saying those who do not know their history have failed to repeat it. In this case, those who do not know their history are going to be destined to find something new. So go play Rolling Thunder. Don't play the ports. Play the original version. You know what to do. Get the emulators, find it online, and you will enjoy being a spy named Albatross. Not albacore, because you won't have an albacore around your neck. You'll have an albatross around your neck going after the evil. What's his name? Mubaraka? Oh my goodness. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Go play Rolling Thunder. Great game. Very underrated game. One of my favorites of all time.